The sun cast long shadows over Misty Creek as Lily Turner crouched behind her father's general store, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth to stifle the sound of her breathing. Just beyond the weathered boards of the building, 3 men on horseback were scanning the dusty main street, their eyes hungry as wolves on the hunt. They were looking for her. Colorado Territory, 1874. Misty Creek had grown from a mining camp to a proper town over the past decade, but it still sat on the ragged edge of civilization, a place where the law only reached when it felt like making the journey. Lily's father had built his general store when the first silver veins were discovered, and they had prospered as the town grew around them. But 6 months ago, pneumonia had taken him, leaving 20-year-old Lily to run the business alone. Alone, that is, until Silas Gregg and his gang rode into town 3 days ago. "She's got to be around here somewhere," a gravelly voice called out. "Silas, check the alley again, Jeb." Lily pressed herself flatter against the rough wood. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain they would hear it. The crunch of boots on gravel grew closer. "Miss Turner." Silas's voice rang out, mock sweet and terrible. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You know what I want, and you know you don't have a choice." What Silas wanted was her father's store, the most profitable business in Misty Creek, and he'd decided the easiest way to get it was to marry its owner. When Lily had refused his proposal the previous day, his charm had vanished like morning dew under a scorching sun. He'd given her until sundown to reconsider. Sundown had come and gone. Lily wasn't a fool. She'd heard the stories about Silas Gregg and his men. They'd been rustling cattle from the nearby ranches for months, and rumor had it they'd killed 2 men over in Blackwater who'd tried to stand up to them. The sheriff of Misty Creek was conveniently visiting his sister in Denver, and wouldn't be back for another week. By then, Lily feared she'd be Mrs. Silas Gregg, with no legal recourse to escape. The footsteps came closer. Lily glanced desperately toward the back of the alley, where it opened onto the prairie beyond. If she ran now, she might make it to the woods. But what then? Night was falling, and the temperatures dropped bitterly this time of year. "Found her!" The triumphant shout made her blood run cold. Jeb stood at the mouth of the alley, pointing at her with a yellow-toothed grin. "She's here, Silas." Lily bolted, her skirts bunched in her hands as she ran toward the back of the alley. She heard the pound of boots behind her, felt rough hands grab at her arm, yanking her backward with enough force to make her cry out in pain. "That wasn't very hospitable, Miss Turner." Silas's breath was hot on her face, reeking of whiskey and tobacco. He was handsome in a hard way, with sharp blue eyes and a mustache waxed to points. But there was a coldness in his gaze that had always set Lily's teeth on edge. "I don't like having to chase after my bride." "I am not your bride," Lily spat, struggling against his grip. "Let me go." Silas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, but you are. Judge Wilson's waiting at the saloon. He's been most accommodating, especially after I explained how eager we both are to be wed." "I won't do it," Lily said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "You can't force me to say the words. You'd be surprised what people can be forced to do." Silas nodded to Jeb and his other man, a hulking brute named Farley. "Get her to the saloon, and if she screams, gag her." Jeb's dirty fingers dug into her arm as they dragged her down the main street. Lily fought with every step, but it was futile. A few townspeople watched from darkened doorways, their faces etched with pity, but no one moved to help. They were all too afraid of Silas and his gang. The Broken Spur saloon blazed with light, piano music spilling out onto the street along with the sound of raucous laughter. Lily had never set foot inside respectable women didn't, but tonight she was being hauled through its swinging doors like a sack of flour. The music stuttered to a halt as they entered. A dozen men turned to stare, whiskey glasses paused halfway to lips. In the corner, a heavy-set man in a black suit sat at a table, a Bible and some papers laid out before him. Judge Wilson. His jowly face was flushed with drink, but he had enough shame to look away when his eyes met Lily's. "Gentlemen," Silas announced, sweeping his hat off with a theatrical flourish. "You're all invited to witness the happiest day of my life. Miss Turner has finally agreed to become my wife." "That's a lie," Lily shouted, renewing her struggles. "He's forcing me. Judge Wilson, please, you can't allow this." The judge cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, Miss Turner, let's not make a scene. Marriage is a sacred institution, and Mr. Gregg here has assured me of his honorable intentions. His intentions are to steal my store." Lily's voice cracked with desperation. "Please, someone help me." Silas's grip on her arm tightened painfully. "My bride's got a case of nerves, that's all. Perfectly natural." His voice lowered, meant for her ears only. "Stop fighting, or I'll have Farley pay a visit to your friend Mrs. Coleman and her children. Understand?" Lily went still. Martha Coleman was a widow with 3 young children, and Lily's closest friend in town. The threat wasn't idle, she could see it in Silas's eyes. "That's better," Silas said, his smile widening. "Judge, shall we proceed? I believe we've delayed my nuptials long enough." Judge Wilson nodded, standing up with a slight sway. "Yes, yes. Bring the bride forward." Lily felt numb as Jeb and Farley half-carried, half-dragged her to stand before the judge. This couldn't be happening. But it was, and there seemed to be nothing she could do to stop it. She thought of her father, of how proud he'd been of the store they'd built together. How could it end like this? "Dearly beloved," Judge Wilson began, his words slightly slurred, "we are gathered here today." The saloon doors burst open with a crash that made everyone jump. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the night, the brim of his hat pulled low over his face. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then the stranger stepped inside, boots thudding heavily on the wooden floor. As he moved into the lamplight, Lily could see he was young, perhaps 25, with broad shoulders and a face bronzed by the sun. A star-shaped badge glinted on his chest. "Evening, folks," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room. "Seems I'm interrupting something." Silas recovered first, his free hand drifting toward the gun at his hip. "This is a private ceremony, stranger. State your business and move along." The young man's eyes, startlingly green against his tan skin, flicked from Silas to Lily, taking in her tear-streaked face and the bruising grip on her arm. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "My business," he said slowly, "is that I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Brody Daniels. And it looks to me like this lady isn't here of her own free will." Hope surged in Lily's chest, so sudden and fierce it almost hurt. "I'm not," she said quickly, before Silas could silence her. "They're forcing me to marry him. Please help me." Marshal Daniels nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. His gaze returned to Silas, hardening. "Let the lady go." A tense silence fell over the saloon. Lily could feel Silas's indecision in the way his fingers flexed on her arm. His gang outnumbered the marshal, but killing a federal lawman would bring down trouble even Silas might not be able to handle. "This is a local matter," Silas said finally, forcing a smile. "No need for federal involvement. Miss Turner and I have an understanding." "Is that why she's got bruises forming on her arm?" Marshal Daniels cut in, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "Strange kind of understanding." Silas's smile vanished. "I don't take kindly to outsiders interfering in my affairs. And I don't take kindly to men who force women into unwanted marriages." The marshal's hand hadn't moved toward his gun, but there was something in his stance that made it clear he was ready for whatever came next. Last chance. Let her go. The tension in the room pulled taut as a bowstring. Lily held her breath, eyes darting between Silas and the marshal. Then, with a sudden movement that made her gasp, Silas shoved her toward Jeb. "Hold her," he snarled, and drew his pistol in one fluid motion. Everything happened at once. Jeb's arms locked around Lily. Silas fired, the shot deafening in the confined space. Marshal Daniels moved with startling speed, diving to the side as he drew his own weapon. His shot caught Silas in the shoulder, spinning the outlaw backward. Farley bellowed and charged the marshal like a bull, while around them the saloon erupted into chaos. Men overturned tables for cover, scrambling out of the line of fire. The bartender ducked behind the bar. Judge Wilson crawled under his table, clutching his Bible to his chest. Lily drove her elbow hard into Jeb's stomach. He grunted in surprise, his grip loosening just enough for her to break free. She stumbled forward, away from the fight, only to be caught by Silas's good arm as he recovered from the marshal's shot. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, pressing his gun to her temple. The room froze. Marshal Daniels stood with his weapon trained on Silas, while Farley hesitated mid-charge, unsure what to do now that his boss had a hostage. "Drop your gun, Marshal," Silas ordered, "or I'll put a bullet in her pretty head." Lily could feel Silas's blood soaking into her sleeve where his wounded shoulder pressed against her. His breath came in pained gasps, but his hand holding the gun was steady. Marshal Daniels's eyes met Lily's, and in that brief moment, something passed between them, a silent communication, a promise. He slowly lowered his weapon. "Smart man," Silas said, backing toward the door with Lily still in his grip. "Jeb, Farley, we're leaving. Bring the horses around." "You won't get far," Marshal Daniels said quietly. "Wounded in the dark with a hostage. Be smarter than this, Greg." "I'm smart enough to know when I've got the upper hand." Silas tightened his grip on Lily, making her wince. "And right now, that's exactly what I've got." Farley backed toward the door, while Jeb slipped outside to fetch the horses. The other saloon patrons remained frozen, no one willing to risk Lily's life by making a move. "When I leave this town," Silas hissed in Lily's ear, "you're coming with me, and then you'll marry me or I'll leave your body for the coyotes. Understand?" Lily didn't answer. Her mind was racing, searching for a way out. The pressure of the gun barrel against her temple made it hard to think clearly. Outside, she heard the clatter of hooves as Jeb brought the horses around. Silas began edging toward the door, keeping Lily between himself and the marshal. Marshal Daniels hadn't moved, but his eyes tracked their every step, alert and calculating. Just as they reached the saloon doors, Lily made her decision. Taking a deep breath, she suddenly went limp in Silas's grip, letting her full weight drop toward the floor. Silas, caught off guard and already weakened by his wound, struggled to hold her up. His gun wavered away from her head for just an instant. It was all the opening Marshal Daniels needed. He moved like lightning, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. His fist connected with Silas's wounded shoulder, eliciting a howl of pain. The gun clattered to the floor as Silas released Lily to clutch at his injury. Lily scrambled away on hands and knees as the marshal tackled Silas to the ground. Behind her, she heard Farley shout and the sound of a scuffle breaking out. Several of the saloon patrons had apparently found their courage and were subduing the remaining outlaw. Outside, hoofbeats thundered away Jeb, fleeing into the night. Marshal Daniels had Silas face down on the floor, one knee in his back as he secured the outlaw's hands with handcuffs. Silas was cursing, threatening, promising vengeance, but the marshal paid him no mind. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked Lily, his green eyes finding hers amidst the chaos. Lily shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak. She was trembling, the reality of how close she'd come to being forced into marriage or worse finally hitting her. "Someone fetch the doctor for this shoulder," Marshal Daniels ordered, hauling Silas to his feet. "And find me somewhere secure to hold these men until I can transport them to Denver. The storeroom behind my shop has a strong door," one of the townsmen offered. "We can guard them in shifts." Marshal Daniels nodded his thanks, then turned his attention back to Lily. "Let's get you somewhere safe, Mississippi." "Turner," she supplied, finding her voice at last. "Lily Turner. And thank you, Marshal. If you hadn't come when you did." "Brody," he said with a small smile that transformed his serious face. "And I'm glad I arrived when I did." Once Silas and Farley were secured in the makeshift jail, with volunteers from the town standing guard, Marshal Daniels Brody escorted Lily back to her store. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, and she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the trembling that wouldn't seem to cease. "Are you sure you're all right?" Brody asked as they walked, his eyes scanning the shadows that lined the street. "Just shaken," Lily admitted. "I can't believe they almost—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "But they didn't," Brody said firmly. "And they won't get another chance. I'll be taking them to Denver to stand trial as soon as I can arrange transportation." They reached the general store, its dark windows reflecting the stars overhead. Lily fumbled with her keys, her hands still unsteady. Brody gently took them from her and unlocked the door. "I should check the premises," he said, drawing his gun. "Wait here." Lily watched as he slipped inside, moving with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to danger. A few minutes later, he returned to the doorway. "All clear," he announced. "You live upstairs?" Lily nodded. "My father built the apartment when he constructed the store. It's just me now." Something softened in Brody's expression. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Lily hesitated at the threshold. The thought of being alone after everything that had happened made her stomach clench with anxiety. Would you mind staying just for a little while? I could make some coffee." Brody holstered his weapon. "I'd like that." Inside, Lily lit the lamps and stoked the embers in the small stove to heat water for coffee. The familiar tasks helped steady her nerves. Brody moved around the store, examining the neatly stocked shelves with interest. "You run this place yourself?" he asked. "Since my father died, yes." Lily measured coffee grounds into the pot. "It's been in our family since Misty Creek was just a few tents and a saloon." "It's impressive," Brody said, and she could tell he meant it. "No wonder Greg wanted to get his hands on it." Lily poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured toward the small table where she usually did her accounts. They sat across from each other, the lamplight casting a warm glow over Brody's features. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she could see the weariness in his face, the shadows under his eyes. "What brings a U.S. Marshal to Misty Creek?" she asked, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "We're hardly important enough to warrant federal attention." A small smile played at the corners of Brody's mouth. "Silas Gregg and his gang. They've been operating across 3 territories, rustling cattle and worse. I've been tracking them for almost 2 months. Then I'm doubly grateful you found them tonight." "Pure luck," Brody admitted. "I was planning to come into town tomorrow, gather information before making my move. But I heard the commotion at the saloon as I was setting up camp outside town." They fell into comfortable conversation as they sipped their coffee. Brody told her about growing up in Kansas, the son of a wheat farmer, and how he joined the Marshal Service after the war. Lily shared stories of Misty Creek's early days, of helping her father in the store as a child, of her dreams to expand the business someday. It was well past midnight when Brody finally stood to leave. "I should check on the prisoners," he said, though he seemed reluctant to go. Will you be all right here alone? I will, Lily said, surprised to find it was true. The terror of the evening had receded, replaced by a cautious sense of safety. What will happen to Jeb? He got away. Brody's expression hardened. He won't get far. I'll track him down after I've delivered Greg and Farley to Denver. At the door he paused, turning back to her. I'll need to take your statement in the morning for the official report. Would it be all right if I came by after breakfast? Of course. Lily hesitated, then impulsively reached out to touch his arm. Thank you again, Marshal Daniels. You saved more than just my life tonight. You saved my future. Something flickered in his green eyes. Brody, he reminded her softly. And you're welcome, Miss Turner. Lily, she corrected with a small smile. Lily, he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name on his tongue. He tipped his hat and stepped into the night, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Lily locked the door behind him and leaned against it, her heart beating a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. True to his word, Brody returned the next morning. He sat at Lily's kitchen table, methodically recording her account of Silas Gregg's attempt to force her into marriage. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, his questions thorough but gentle. And you had no prior relationship with Greg? He asked, looking up from his notes. None, Lily confirmed, pouring more coffee into his cup. He came into the store a few times after arriving in town, asked about prices, that sort of thing. Then 2 days ago he proposed marriage out of nowhere. When I refused, he became insistent. Brody's jaw tightened. That matches what we know about him. He's used similar tactics before, finding businesses owned by women alone and attempting to acquire them through marriage or intimidation. What will happen to him? With your testimony and the charges from other territories, he'll likely spend many years in prison. Brody closed his notebook. I'll need to transport him and Farley to Denver as soon as possible. There's a stage coming through tomorrow that I can arrange to use. Lily tried to hide her disappointment at the news of his imminent departure. In the short time since his arrival, Brody's presence had become a comfort she hadn't realized how much she'd come to rely on. What about Jeb? She asked. No sign of him yet, but I've sent telegrams to neighboring towns to be on the lookout. Brody took a sip of his coffee. Someone will catch up to him eventually. A comfortable silence fell between them. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, highlighting strands of gold in Brody's brown hair. Lily found herself noticing details she'd missed in the chaos of the previous night: the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he smiled. I should open the store, she said finally, reluctant to end their conversation but aware of her responsibilities. People will be wondering what happened last night. Brody nodded, standing. And I should check on the prisoners. Greg's shoulder wound needs tending, though Doc Miller says it's nothing serious. At the top of the stairs leading down to the store, he paused. Would it be all right if I stopped by again this evening? To update you on the arrangements for transporting Greg and Farley. Lily felt a warmth spread through her chest. I'd like that. The day passed in a blur of curious customers and repeated tellings of the previous night's events. Everyone in town seemed to have heard about the drama at the saloon, and they all wanted Lily's first-hand account. By closing time, her voice was hoarse from talking, but her spirits were high. For the first time since her father's death, the townspeople were treating her not as an object of pity, but with a new respect. As promised, Brody returned that evening. This time, Lily had prepared a proper meal: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. When he protested that she shouldn't have gone to such trouble, she simply smiled. It's the least I can do for the man who saved me from becoming Mrs. Silas Gregg. They ate by lamplight, trading stories and discovering shared interests. Brody had a dry wit that made Lily laugh more than she had in months. When he described the time he tracked a fugitive for 2 weeks only to find the man had given himself up at another jurisdiction. His self-deprecating humor made her ribs ache with laughter. "It's good to hear you laugh," Brody said, his green eyes warm as they met hers across the table. "It feels good to laugh," Lily admitted. "I haven't had much cause for it lately. Running the store alone must be difficult." "It is," she acknowledged. "But it's also mine, something I built with my father. I couldn't bear to lose it." Brody reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You won't." The simple touch sent a ripple of awareness through Lily. His hand was warm, calloused from hard work and gun use, but gentle against her skin. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Brody cleared his throat and withdrew his hand, the moment broken but not forgotten. "I should go. It's getting late, and I need to make final preparations for tomorrow's departure." A pang of sadness struck Lily at the reminder. "What time do you leave?" "The stage comes through at noon." Brody stood, gathering his hat from the sideboard. "I'll need to have Greg and Farley ready." At the door, he turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Lily, I want you to know that I admire your courage. The way you fought back against Greg, how you're managing on your own here. It's remarkable." Lily felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "Thank you. That means a great deal, coming from you." Brody hesitated, as if there was something more he wanted to say. Instead, he simply nodded, placed his hat on his head, and stepped out into the night. Lily watched from the window as his tall figure moved down the street toward the impromptu jail. An unfamiliar ache settled in her chest, the bittersweet knowledge that by this time tomorrow, Marshal Brody Daniels would be gone from her life, likely forever. The morning brought a steady rain, turning Misty Creek's dirt streets to mud and casting a gray pall over the town. Lily went through the motions of opening the store, but her heart wasn't in it. Every jingle of the bell above the door made her look up expectantly, hoping to see Brody's tall frame filling the doorway. But he never came. At 11:30, Lily could stand it no longer. She hung the "closed for lunch" sign on the door and hurried through the rain toward the storeroom where Greg and Farley were being held. If Brody was leaving at noon, she wanted a chance to say goodbye properly. She found him outside the makeshift jail, deep in conversation with 2 of the townsmen who had helped guard the prisoners overnight. All 3 were soaked to the skin, but Brody seemed not to notice the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Miss Turner," one of the men greeted her, tipping his hat. "Come to see the Outlaws off?" "Something like that," Lily said, her eyes finding Brody's. "I thought I'd wish the Marshal good luck for his journey." The men exchanged knowing glances and made excuses to check on something inside, leaving Lily and Brody alone in the rain. "You shouldn't be out in this weather," Brody said, but there was a warmth in his eyes that belied the admonishment. "I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye." Lily clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, suddenly uncertain. What had seemed so important in her apartment now felt foolish, standing here in the rain. "I just wanted to thank you again, for everything." Brody stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a strand of wet hair behind her ear. The gentle touch made her breath catch. "I was just doing my job." "Was having dinner with me part of your job too?" Lily asked, summoning her courage. A smile tugged at Brody's lips. "No, that was entirely personal." From down the street came the sound of the approaching stagecoach, its wheels splashing through the puddles. Brody glanced toward the noise, then back at Lily, conflict evident in his expression. "I have to go," he said softly. "Duty." Lily nodded, fighting back the ridiculous urge to cry. She'd known him for barely a day. It made no sense to feel this connection, this pull toward him. And yet she did. "Of course," she managed. "Safe travels, Marshal Daniels." Brody's hand moved to cup her cheek, his touch so tender it made her heart ache. "This isn't goodbye, Lily Turner. I'll be back." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss so brief and gentle it might have been imagined. Then he was turning away, calling for the other men to bring out the prisoners. Lily stood in the rain, fingers pressed to her lips, as Silas Gregg and Farley were led out in handcuffs. Silas's arm was in a sling, his face pale but his eyes still burning with malice as they landed on her. Brody positioned himself between them, blocking Silas's view. The stagecoach pulled up, its driver looking impatient as rain streamed from the brim of his hat. "Let's get a move on, Marshal. I've got a schedule to keep." Brody efficiently loaded his prisoners into the coach, then swung his saddlebags up after them. He turned one last time to look at Lily, standing alone in the rain. 2 weeks, he called to her. "I'll be back in 2 weeks." Then he climbed into the coach, the door slammed shut, and with a crack of the driver's whip, they were gone, leaving nothing but muddy wool tracks in their wake. 2 weeks, Lily thought, a smile spreading across her face despite the rain soaking her to the skin. She could wait 2 weeks. But Brody Daniels did not return in 2 weeks. The days dragged by, each one longer than the last. Lily threw herself into work, taking inventory, ordering new stock, even repainting the store's interior, anything to keep her mind occupied. But at night, alone in her apartment, she found herself reliving that brief kiss in the rain, wondering if she'd imagined the connection between them. By the 3rd week, she'd convinced herself that Brody's promise to return had been nothing more than a kind gesture to a woman he'd rescued. Perhaps he said the same thing to all the damsels in distress he encountered in his line of work. It was a busy Thursday afternoon when the store's bell jingled and Lily looked up from arranging a display of canned goods to see a face she'd hoped never to encounter again. Jeb stood in the doorway, thinner than before and with a wild look in his eyes. His clothes were travel-stained, his beard unkempt. The few customers in the store fell silent, backing away from the notorious outlaw. "Where is he?" Jeb demanded, his hand hovering near his holstered gun. Lily straightened, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Who? Don't play dumb with me. The Marshal. Daniels. Is he here?" "No," Lily said truthfully. "He left weeks ago." "Why would he be here?" Jeb's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Because he's been dogging my trail since Denver. Thought he might have circled back here." A flicker of hope kindled in Lily's chest at the news that Brody was still in the territory, but she kept her expression neutral. "Well, he hasn't. Now, unless you're here to buy something, I'll have to ask you to leave." Jeb's laugh was ugly. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. No wonder Silas wanted you." He stepped further into the store, making the other customers press themselves against the walls. "Maybe I should finish what he started." Lily's hand moved beneath the counter, fingers closing around the shotgun her father had taught her to use years ago. "I wouldn't advise that." "You threatening me, girl?" Jeb took another step forward. "She doesn't have to. I'll do it for her." The voice from the doorway made Jeb freeze. Lily's heart leapt to her throat as she saw Brody standing there, his gun already drawn and aimed at Jeb's back. "Hands where I can see them, Jeb," Brody ordered, his voice hard as iron. "Now." For a tense moment, Lily thought Jeb might try to draw. But something in Brody's tone must have convinced him of the futility of resistance. Slowly, he raised his hands. "On your knees," Brody commanded, advancing into the store. "Cross your ankles." Jeb complied, muttering curses under his breath. Brody holstered his gun only long enough to efficiently handcuff the outlaw, then hauled him to his feet. "Marshal Daniels, one of the customers said with evident relief. "Good to see you back in town." "Good to be back," Brody replied, though his eyes were fixed on Lily. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "I'll take this one to the sheriff's office," he continued, giving Jeb a small shove toward the door. "He arrived last week, I hear." "Yes," Lily confirmed, finding her voice at last. "Sheriff Blake returned from Denver. He's been quite remorseful about being away when everything happened." Brody nodded. "I'll speak with him. Jeb here has a lot to answer for." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Turner, when you close up for the day, would you mind stopping by the sheriff's office? I'll need your statement regarding this incident." Despite the formal words, there was something in his eyes that told Lily he had more than official business on his mind. "Of course, Marshal. I close at 6. With a nod that contained a promise, Brody led the sullen Jeb out of the store. The remaining hours of the business day crawled by. Lily found herself checking the clock every few minutes, straightening merchandise that didn't need straightening, and jumping at every sound of the bell above the door. By 5:30, she could stand it no longer and hung the closed sign, shooing out her last few customers with apologies about an important appointment. The walk to the sheriff's office had never seemed so long. Lily's heart pounded against her ribs as she approached the small building at the end of the main street. Through the window, she could see Brody sitting at a desk, writing in what appeared to be the same notebook he'd used to take her statement weeks ago. She smoothed her skirts, patted her hair into place, and took a deep breath before opening the door. Brody looked up at the sound, and the smile that spread across his face chased away any doubts Lily might have harbored about his feelings. He stood quickly, nearly knocking over his chair in his haste. "Lily," he said, her name on his lips like a prayer. "You're late," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "You said 2 weeks." Brody moved around the desk, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. "I know. I'm sorry. There were complications in Denver with Greg's case, and then I picked up Jeb's trail." He stopped, shaking his head. "But that's no excuse. I should have sent word." "Yes, you should have." Lily tried to sound stern, but it was difficult with him standing so close, his green eyes earnest and apologetic. "I won't make that mistake again," Brody promised, reaching out to take her hands in his. "If you'll give me another chance." Lily looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. "I suppose I could be persuaded." Relief washed over Brody's features, followed quickly by a more serious expression. "Lily, there's something I need to tell you. About my job." Lily's heart sank. Here it came, the explanation of why he couldn't stay, why his work would always take him away. She braced herself for disappointment. "I've requested a transfer," Brody said, surprising her. "To the Colorado Territory office in Denver." "Denver," Lily repeated, confused. "But that's 3 days' ride from Misty Creek," Brody finished for her. "Close enough that I could visit regularly, if that's something you might want." Hope bloomed in Lily's chest, as fragile and beautiful as the first spring flower after a harsh winter. "Is that something you want?" Brody's hands tightened on hers. "Lily, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I left. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but there's something between us. Something I've never felt before." He took a deep breath. "And yes, I want to see where it leads. If you'll let me court you properly." Lily felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. "I'd like that very much, Brody Daniels." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down. This time, when their lips met, it was no brief goodbye kiss in the rain. It was a beginning, a promise, a homecoming. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Brody rested his forehead against hers. "I have to take Jeb to Denver tomorrow," he murmured. "But I'll be back in a week. No delays this time." Lily smiled up at him. "I'll hold you to that, Marshal." And he kept his word. Every 2 weeks for the next 6 months, Brody made the journey from Denver to Misty Creek, staying for 3 or 4 days before duty called him back. In between visits, letters flew back and forth, each one deepening the connection between them. During his visits, they explored the countryside around Misty Creek on horseback, dined at the newly opened hotel restaurant, and spent quiet evenings in Lily's apartment above the store, talking for hours. Brody proved to be not just brave and honorable, but thoughtful and surprisingly well-read for a man who spent most of his time in the saddle. With each visit, leaving became more difficult. Lily would stand on the porch of her store, waving until Brody's figure disappeared down the road toward Denver, her heart going with him. It was during his visit in early December, with snow blanketing Misty Creek in white silence, that everything changed. They were sitting before the fire in Lily's small parlor, a pot of coffee warming on the stove and a comfortable silence between them. "I've been thinking," Brody said suddenly, setting aside the book he'd been reading. Lily looked up from her needlework. "That sounds dangerous." The teasing earned her a smile, but there was a seriousness in Brody's eyes that made her set down her sewing. "What is it?" Brody shifted to face her more directly. "These past 6 months have been the happiest of my life, but these goodbyes are getting harder." "I know," Lily said softly. "For me too. So I've been thinking about solutions." Brody reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Lily's breath caught in her throat as he moved to kneel before her chair. "Lily Turner," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness evident in his eyes. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first night, when you faced down Silas Gregg with more courage than most men I know." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Lily's vision as she nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Brody Daniels, I will marry you." The kiss that followed was filled with all the love and promise of their future together. When they broke apart, Brody slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. "There's more," he said, taking her hands in his. "I've been offered a position as sheriff in Silver Creek." "Silver Creek," Lily repeated. "But that's only 20 miles from here," Brody finished with a smile. "Close enough that I could ride home every night." Home. The word hung in the air between them, full of meaning. "You'd give up being a marshal?" Lily asked, knowing how much his badge meant to him. "For you? In a heartbeat." Brody's thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "The truth is, I'm ready for something different, something more settled. Being a marshal means always being on the move, always chasing the next fugitive. I want to build something permanent with you." Lily felt a surge of love so strong it almost overwhelmed her. "I want that too." They were married on Christmas Eve in Misty Creek's small church, with snow falling gently outside and candles glowing within. Lily wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her slimmer frame, and carried a bouquet of winter evergreens tied with ribbon. Brody, in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on the arm of Sheriff Blake, who had offered to give her away. The whole town turned out for the celebration, filling the church to capacity. Even Mrs. Coleman's children participated, the youngest girl serving as flower girl, while the older boy proudly carried the rings. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises of love and fidelity exchanged before God and their community. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Brody's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a vow of its own for the life they would build together. The reception at the hotel afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than the small town had seen in one place in years. Lily and Brody moved through it all in a happy daze, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone they passed. As midnight approached, Brody took Lily's hand and led her away from the celebration. "I have a surprise for you," he murmured against her ear. They bundled up against the cold and Brody helped Lily into a waiting sleigh, tucking warm blankets around her before taking the reins. The horses' bells jingled merrily as they pulled away from the hotel, heading out of town. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, nestling against her husband's side. "You'll see," Brody said, a smile in his voice. They traveled for about 15 minutes, the sleigh cutting through fresh snow under a sky brilliant with stars. Finally, Brody drew the horses to a halt before a small house set back from the road. Light glowed from within, smoke curling from the chimney into the night air. "What is this?" Lily asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "Our home," Brody said simply. "If you like it." Lily turned to him in surprise. "Our home? But how did you—" "I've been working on it for the past 2 months. Every time I came to visit," Brody explained, helping her down from the sleigh. "The days I told you I had business in Silver Creek? This was my business." Tears pricked at Lily's eyes for the second time that day. "You built us a house?" "With some help," Brody admitted. "But yes, it's halfway between Misty Creek and Silver Creek. You can still run the store, and I can still be sheriff, and we can be together every night." Lily threw her arms around him, not caring about the cold or the snow or anything except the overwhelming love she felt for this man. "It's perfect," she whispered against his neck. "You're perfect." Brody laughed, the sound joyous in the quiet night. "Far from it, but I promise to try every day to be worthy of you." He swept her into his arms, making her gasp in surprise. "Now, Mrs. Daniels, shall we go inside? It's our wedding night after all." Lily blushed but nodded, her arms tightening around his neck as he carried her through the snow to the porch. At the door he paused. "Welcome home, Lily," he said softly, and carried her across the threshold into their new life together. 5 years later, Lily stood on that same porch, watching as a rider approached down the long drive. Even at a distance, she would know her husband anywhere the way he sat a horse, the broad set of his shoulders, the tilt of his hat. Behind her, the door opened and their 3-year-old son, William, burst onto the porch. "Papa's home!" he shouted, jumping up and down in excitement. "Yes, he is," Lily smiled, resting a hand on her rounded belly where their second child grew. "Right on time for supper, as promised." As Brody dismounted and swept William up into his arms, Lily thought back to that rainy day in Misty Creek, when she'd stood watching a stagecoach disappear with a man she barely knew but somehow already loved. How different her life might have been if Brody hadn't kept his promise to return. "What are my favorite people doing out in this cold?" Brody asked, climbing the porch steps with William perched on his shoulders. "Waiting for you, of course," Lily replied, accepting his kiss with a smile. Inside, their home was warm and bright, filled with the mingled scents of baking bread and the stew simmering on the stove. As they sat down to dinner, Brody shared news from Silver Creek while William chattered about his day's adventures. Later, with William tucked in bed and the house quiet save for the crackling of the fire, Brody pulled Lily into his lap in the rocking chair by the hearth. "Happy?" he asked, his hand gently caressing her belly. "Completely," Lily answered truthfully, laying her head on his shoulder. "And grateful every day that you kicked down those saloon doors 5 years ago." Brody chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "Best decision I ever made." I don't know," Lily teased. "Asking me to marry you was a pretty good decision too." "That it was, Mrs. Daniels." Brody's arms tightened around her. That it was. Outside, snow began to fall, adding a fresh layer of white to the world. But inside, wrapped in each other's arms before the fire, Lily and Brody were warmer and more content than they had ever imagined possible on that fateful night when an outlaw tried to force a marriage and a marshal kicked down a door, changing both their lives forever.